Arizona Cardinals fans finally got to see the first team offense on the field in the second preseason game against the Kansas City Chiefs. That was rough. So let's just get this out of the way. The first team offense looked really bad. They couldn't move the ball, they couldn't protect Kyler Murray. Just in general, it wasn't a good showing. Now, the first team defense did fare better than the offense. They weren't stellar, but they did a decent job stopping the Chiefs. Though there were a couple of plays where Patrick Mahomes could have had a touchdown, but he missed the open receiver. But I'm a believer that you don't overreact to preseason games when it comes to outcomes and performance of starters who are rusty. I know some Cardinals fans are really discouraged and frustrated, but I'm not going to read too much into this preseason game when it comes to the starters. What I am interested in, though, is how some of the rookies and players who are on the bubble performed in this game. So in this video, I'm going to give a brief overview of how the rookies performed, and then do a little bit deeper dive into some of the players that I think had noteworthy games, good or bad. Now, when we look at the PFF grades for the rookies, we see that overall they didn't perform quite as well as they did last week. Zaven Collins played almost twice as many snaps this week as he did against Dallas. Unfortunately, his PFF grade of 47.5 was a good bit lower than the 71.3 he earned last week. Though he had a little bit of a rough game at points, he still had his moments when he looked like a veteran linebacker, and you'll see this when we look at the film in a moment. Rondale Moore also had a much lower grade than last week, though this could be partly chalked up to the fact that the offense just in general looked anemic. Marco Wilson had another solid game, grading at 74.4. He saw far fewer snaps though this week, going from 35 defensive snaps against Dallas to 10 against Kansas City. And you didn't see the kind of plays out of him this week as you did last week, in large part because he wasn't targeted at all. But in general, this is a great sign for Wilson to have yet another solid week. Victor Dimukeje had a really tough outing this week, though. He played roughly the same amount of snaps as he did last week, but his grade of 34.0 was far lower than his grade of 61.2 last week. Tay Gowan graded slightly higher than he did last week. Last week his defensive grade was 50.4, and this week he had a 54.6. His coverage grade of 58.9 was also a little bit higher than last week's grade of 54.5. Now, he did have one really rough play out there, giving up 36 yards on a slant route. It's also noteworthy that safety Charles Washington was partly responsible for that play. Now, James Wiggins and Michal Menet both had 0 snaps on offense or defense. They did each have a couple special team snaps, but by and large, both were largely kept out of the game. But when you look at these two rookies, I think there are two very different situations going on. Wiggins played well last week in both defense and special teams, and I think he's earned a spot in this roster already. I could be wrong, but I think the reason we didn't see him is because the Cardinals wanted to see more of players like Charles Washington and Sean Williams to get a sense of if they're going to keep one or both of those players. Michal Menet, on the other hand, really struggled last week, and I have to wonder if they don't already anticipate trying to get him on the practice squad. There were also a handful of other players that I thought had noteworthy games, including backup offensive lineman Max Garcia. Though Garcia has been primarily a guard throughout his career, he's been taking snaps at center, and they're hoping he can be the backup at that position behind Rodney Hudson. He really struggled last week at Dallas with a PFF grade of 28.7, but showed a lot of improvement this week with a solid grade of 78.6. And I think Max Garcia's ability to play backup center is another reason that Michal Menet is going to end up on the practice squad. But as far as I'm concerned, the most impressive performance this week was Byron Murphy Jr. He had an exceptional PFF grade of 91.4 on 32 snaps. Murphy played solid both in terms of tackling and coverage, and had one of the best plays of the game when he intercepted Pat Mahomes in the end zone. Isaiah Simmons is another player who had a better performance this week than he did last week. His grade of 72.7 on 41 snaps was a significant improvement over last week's grade of 49.3. And when we're looking at Simmons' film, I think it makes sense to also look at Zaven Collins' film because they play off each other so much. Now, in the first play we're going to look at, Simmons did need a little bit of help being directed towards his assignment, but he did a good job of closing in, making the tackle, and forcing a fourth down. Now this next play we're going to look at is one of those plays where Simmons struggled. We see that he's in pursuit of Patrick Mahomes, but Simmons overcommits, gets turned around a bit, and Mahomes is able to run for the first down. This next play is one where Collins and Simmons both work together to make a nice play. Zaven Collins does a good job of recognizing the run play, hitting the run lane, and forcing the runner to cut back towards Isaiah Simmons, who squares up and makes the tackle. Though Collins wasn't able to make the tackle himself, he did a good job of setting up the play, which Isaiah Simmons then finished. The next play we're going to look at is one of the better plays by Zaven Collins during this game. Here he's going to shoot this gap, get past the blockers, and get to the running back along with fellow rookie Victor Dimukeje. The last play we're going to look at for Simmons and Collins is unfortunately one where they both struggled. After the handoff, you see Collins gets swallowed up by the blockers and is unable to make a play. But you also see Simmons is looping around and has a shot at tackling the running back. But unfortunately, he misses a tackle as well, and it's a first down. Altogether, there were a lot of ups and downs for both of these linebackers. But when I take everything into account, I'm pretty optimistic about how they're going to perform this year. The next player I want to talk about is someone who unfortunately I feel like had the worst game of anyone on this roster, and that's second-year linebacker Evan Weaver. Weaver missed tackle after tackle both on defense and in special teams. And the thing you have to understand about Weaver is when he was drafted last year, the scouting report on him was that he lacked elite physical traits, but made up for it with his motor, anticipation, and solid tackling. But when that's the kind of player you are coming into this league, you can't have a game like this where you're missing all these tackles and hope to make a roster. If a player like Zaven Collins or Isaiah Simmons miss a tackle, teams will live with that because they have the elite physical traits that can help make up for those occasional lapses. But when Evan Weaver is bouncing off tackles, missing players, and in general looking ineffective, he doesn't have those elite physical traits to fall back on. In fact, this game was so bad for him that I wonder if he's even going to be on the practice squad this year. He's the kind of high-effort player you want to pull for. But unfortunately, what I saw on tape from Weaver reinforces why teams place such an emphasis on physical traits coming out of college. The last three players I want to mention are going to be grouped together because they were all part of that scoring drive for the Cardinals late in the game. That's quarterback Chris Streveler, wide receiver Greg Dortch, and tight end Ross Travis. I see all three of these as players who are on the roster bubble, and all three did something to state their case for making the team. Now, I've been critical of Streveler's play. I really doubted his ability to be a legitimate backup quarterback in the NFL. He's a great runner, but I just didn't see it out of his arm. But he showed some things on that drive that make me wonder if I might be wrong about him. He had a couple nice throws to Greg Dortch, who also had a good game last week. And if one of the receivers like Andy Isabella doesn't make this roster, I think Greg Dortch has a good shot at being that sixth wide receiver. And with as many question marks as there are at tight end on this roster, Ross Travis made a case for why he deserves a spot on this roster, capped off by a really nice catch on an excellent throw by Chris Streveler for a touchdown. So aside from the struggles of that first string offense, what stood out to you about this game? Let me know in the comments below. Also, please be sure to click like on this video. That really helps out a lot in terms of YouTube recommending this video to other people who might not know about my channel. And if you're watching this video and you're not subscribed, please consider subscribing. That also really helps out a lot. Well, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time on The Cardinal Rule.